what do you do before you store a vehicle for winter? And before we started this podcast, I had mentioned I just came back from Halifax and I visited the Steel Wheels Motor Museum in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And they had a sign that said, 1 in 5 people, 20% of the population, has never washed their vehicle.
Well, with all the car washes around, I think it'd be a little better ratio than that. I like to say before you store a vehicle, do a full service on it. So your point, wash it, vac out the interior, wipe off the dashboard. You don't need to use any material on that. Just dust it and vac it out. And actually, an oil change, if you're going to store the vehicle, an oil change is a good thing to do. Make sure your tire pressure's up and check that through the off season. If you have a low tire, some tires, especially high performance tires, will flat spot, and it may take a while in the spring for the tire to get round again, or it may be even permanently damaged. It's a bonding thing. You gotta tell that vehicle that you love it, and then maybe when you go out in the spring, that battery that you've charged every 3 weeks or so, it's ready for you.
Welcome to the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. At Mother Earth News, for 50 years and counting, we've been dedicated to conserving the planet's natural resources while helping you conserve your financial resources. In this podcast, we host conversations with experts in the fields of sustainability, homesteading, natural health, and more to share all about how you can live well wherever you are in a way that values both people and our Mother Earth.
Good day, everyone. I'm Kenny Coogan, and joining me on this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends is Mark Mederski. He is the editor-in-chief of Motorcycle Classics magazine. Over the years, Mark has worked for several museums, including 2 motorcycle museums. He's also a collector of old bikes and has about 30 motorcycles. He does a restoration every few years and enjoys sports cars as well. Today, we'll be talking about winterizing your vehicles. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Good morning, Kenny. How's it going, man?
We're doing great. And now I'm in Tampa, Florida. The weather is just starting to feel nice outside. But Mark, where do you live that makes you an authority on winterizing your vehicles?
I'm in central Ohio, and I think I would say the weather changes in central Ohio are a lot of the problem there. The temperatures in the winter, it'll go down to on average 20, 30 degrees. Maybe we'll get a 50-degree day. In the summer, 75 to 95. And one of the key pieces is condensation you get from temperature change. And when moisture sits on a metal surface, especially if it's unpainted, imagine a mower blade or a shaft or something like that, it promotes corrosion.
And when we think about winter and vehicles, what are some of the main offenders of stored machines?
Number one, if your machine uses a wet cell battery, a lead acid battery, you need to take care of that properly. The best shot there is to maintain a charge, and there are various kind of battery maintenance devices you can use. If you're good to your equipment, it can help if you charge that battery every 3 weeks. I'm a little fearful of consistent all through the winter battery maintenance machine, but go out and charge it every few weeks. And then the other piece is a fuel system. That's probably the worst offender. You can really get into problems there, especially with our new fuels with alcohol in them. What I prefer to do, again, a little tedious, but you can pull the fuel line. If you have a fuel line connecting the fuel tank to the carburetor of the machine, remove the fuel line and start the engine and run it until it is out of gas. There's fuel sitting in the float bowl normally, and if you run the engine until it's out of gas, you'll remove the fuel that's in there that can gum up the jets and small passageways. And then in the spring, you reconnect the fuel line and turn on the fuel, and you'll have a fresh charge of fuel in that carburetor. The fuel in the carburetor, the battery are 2 big things. The other piece of it is just general corrosion problems. You'll see moisture accumulate with temperature changes. This is assuming you have the vehicle or the mower or whatever it is in a barn or a garage. Those temperature changes and the condensation will even corrode zinc plating. It's a good idea to keep the machine at a constant temperature, put a cover over it that will breathe. Just an old bed sheet, a cotton bed sheet is good. A piece of polyethylene plastic is probably not good. And another piece, which we don't usually think about these little beasties, but if you do get field mice or, God forbid, chipmunks or squirrels into your storage area, they can really wreak havoc. They can chew on wires. A lot of modern wires, the insulation is made from soy based plastic, and they like to munch on that. And a wire harness with no insulation is a very dangerous thing. So keeping the vermin away, there's urine and feces, and maybe a baby mouse nest could grow in a cavity somewhere in your machines. So that's a bad thing. So if your doors are sealed, whatever way you can do that, constant temperatures, those are helpful things.
We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, Soaper's Choice. For more than 25 years, Soaper's Choice has been the trusted name in high-quality oils and ingredients for handcrafted soaps and cosmetics. If you're passionate about creating, whether it's a hobby or a full-fledged business, Soaper's Choice is your one-stop shop. Their impressive range of products includes everything from organic oils and specialty waxes to natural butters and soap bases. Happy soap making!
We're talking about winterizing your vehicles, and you just gave us a lot of scenarios that could happen to our stored machines. Now, when you were giving us that list, are you thinking of old cars and old bikes that you only want to take out on nice weather? Or are you also talking about like tractors? Because I'm thinking like a snow plow and just like your normal car you're going to have access to throughout the winter.
If you're in the northern climates up in Minnesota or something like that, you're going to need to keep access to that plowing tractor or four-wheel drive pickup. So those are probably okay. Frequent use is always a good thing. A lot of people say don't store your old car or motorcycle or lawnmower, operate it, because the longer it sits, seals dry up, fuel systems go bad, electrical and all that. Keeping your eye on it and using it a lot is good. But if it's off season, and that nice 65 Chevy convertible has to sit in the garage while there's salt and brine thrown down on the roads, that's when you got to pay attention to these things. There are some devices I've heard of that make sounds that annoy rodents and keep them out of your storage space. My old boss, John Parham, used to use those in some of his barns. I'm not sure how effective they are, but yeah, seasonality is a tough thing, whether it's a recreational vehicle or something that you just got to use. For example, your idea of a snowplow.
Now, you also mentioned salt just now. And Mark, I don't know if you know this, but I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I moved to Florida 12 years ago, and I still have my 14, 15-year-old car. And how do we prevent that salt on those northern vehicles?
That is really tough. I refer to myself as a salt phobic. I ride none of my motorcycles once they put salt down on the roads, and none of my good cars. My poor old Honda Odyssey bears the brunt of the salt, but it's really tough if you can go to the so-called quarter car wash with your car and spray it down, hit the suspension components, underside of the transmission and all those things. I'm not really sure if you can even get into the areas that will eventually become rust through, the ugly areas, your fender arches and things like that. It seems like almost every pickup truck manufactured has naturally designed in cavities above the rear wheel arches that collect stuff. If you're real aggressive there and maybe can spray up in there, pull your fender liners every few years and clean it out in there, maybe throw on a coat of a rust preventive material. That's always good. We're a busy society and it can be difficult, but getting the salt off as soon as possible is good, and cleaning out cavities that might hold corrosive materials.
So we want to protect our vehicles in the winter, and you mentioned hopefully you could put them in a barn or a temperature stable area. Is undercover the next best option if you don't have a garage or a barn?
If you're in a snowy climate, snow accumulation is a freeze thaw situation. You're around your windshield wipers on a car. You can get an ice buildup in there. Some of the drains at the cowl can get plugged up. Sunroofs and things like that can be problematic. Be real careful if your car is sitting out, not under cover. You got to be careful with your door handles. If the door freezes and you're aggressive on that door handle, you could even snap it off. Ideally, you've got a carport or park the vehicle up against a building, maybe so that the drifts are going the other direction and you're not getting a lot of snow buildup on the car or truck.
I want to go back to storing your vehicles. You mentioned we want like a steady temperature, probably insulated, small garage. How important is a dehumidifier?
A dehumidifier is a luxury, but if you can set that up, that's good. The ones that auto drain one way or another would be ideal. So you don't have to go out there and make sure that it's not full and has shut down. But if you have a pretty well sealed up garage, in other words, the temperature changes, the fluctuations are slow. An open frame garage with just siding on it could run down to, in the winter where I live, it could go down to 25 or 30 degrees and up to 60 or 70 during the day. And that's what's really bad. Dehumidifier in that setting would be good, but wow, you're almost beginning to dehumidify your block that you live on, because if you live in a porous garage, you're dehumidifying more than just the air that's in that room.
And I think you mentioned about covering your vehicles. Why do people fully wrap their vehicles sometime? And then why do we want to have it open underneath?
I think you see boats are a good example. That seems to be a really well practiced shrink wrap setup. That's an example of a machine that in a lot of climates is just flat put away. I have friends on a lake in Ohio, and they call it quits maybe in mid-October, and the boat is stored down the road and they wrap it. And then all of our discussion about vermin, insects, spiders, whatever getting in there are taken care of with that wrap setup. So you could do that, but I do not know exactly what's going on under there as far as condensation. Boats are made to be wet. Some boats are even made to be in salt climates. Like I'm on Cape Cod this week, and they've got water or humidity and salt in the air. But if you did totally wrap vehicle, like put it in a bag. There are companies that sell bags you can drive your car or motorcycle into. That would solve some problems, but I'd still want it at a constant temperature. I'd still fear condensation inside that bag.
How do you corrosion proof different vehicles?
It depends on the surface that you're working on, but ideally you keep the paint clean, collection of any kind of road grime and dirt. If you think about all the brake rotors and pads and tires that are constantly wearing, you wonder where in the universe it's collecting, but some of that is collecting on the surface of your car. So there's actually iron oxide particles and whatever's in modern brake pads sitting on your car. So if you're going to store it, as we discussed earlier, wash it and wax it, and then you've gotten most of that material off. It's pretty tough though. The engine compartment, not a bad idea to go in there with probably a spray lubricant with a little wand on it and shoot some of the linkages that you can see. Battery terminals, there are greases and such for those to, again, corrosion proof them. Door hinges on your trunk, your hatch, your 2 or 4 doors, hood hinges and such like that. If you can get into those joints, shoot a little bit of oil on them, and that makes everything a little better in the spring too.
You say that fuel systems cause the most problems. Why is that, and how can we prevent that?
The gasoline, it's best if it's changed out. Like normally people are driving about 15,000 miles a year, so 1,200 miles a month or something. Like that's really good. You're always getting a fresh charge of fuel in there. Modern fuels are unstable. A lot of the components in them evaporate or just flat change over time sitting in your fuel tank. So getting that out of the carburetor, given again that it is a carbureted machine, most road vehicles are fuel injected now, but getting that fuel out of there so it doesn't go through its changes while it's in those tiny jets and passageways, that's a good thing. Some fuel tanks are plastic for the most part. Those have been designed with the thought of the chemistry in modern fuels not attacking them, but back when they used fiberglass fuel tanks on some vehicles, motorcycles especially. Now, if you still had a gallon of 1970 high test, it wouldn't attack the fiberglass. But now, with the additives that are in modern fuels to make the emissions more friendly, burn cleaner, those will attack fiberglass and destroy it.
I'm in Florida and I bought a trash pump and 200 feet of 3-inch hose just in case we have a hurricane situation. And
Yeah.
I'm only using the trash pump every few years because when I needed it, nobody was able to get me one because they were all rented for the entire state. So I said, I better buy my own. So hypothetically, I'm only using this once a year or once every few years in the month of August. And you mentioned I should drain it, but would it be better for me to run it empty to get all of the gasoline out of it?
So that's a water pump essentially. And so you're in the same kind of a situation as a person who might buy a generator in case of a power outage, right? There, I would say you're probably better to cycle it, go out there and run it every month. And same with a generator, frankly, run it every month. But a caution on that, I just had a conversation with my oldest motorhead buddy, and he said if you don't run your generator, or in this case, Kenny, your pump, long enough, like as in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, so that you fully heat the engine and the exhaust system on it, the muffler and all that. If you started it, got it hot, and shut it off, you're going to get condensation in the crankcase lubricant and probably in the combustion chamber, on surfaces on the engine, and that promotes all kinds of problems. So if you give it a good cycle, like you get it real hot, 20-minute run, whether it's a pump or a generator, you're probably in pretty good shape. Do that monthly. Don't fire it up in June in anticipation of the potential for flooding.
We're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor, and when we return, we'll be focusing on what to do with batteries over winter.
Attention soap makers and cosmetic creators. Are you looking for top quality ingredients for your next project? Look no further than Soaper's Choice. Whether you're a full-fledged business or are simply making soaps for your own home, Soaper's Choice knows excellent ingredients are at the heart of everything that you craft. That's why they offer premium quality and reliable sourcing for all their products in the right sizes for you. Head to www.soaperschoice.com to explore their full list of products, including soap bases, oils, butters, and waxes.
We are back with Mark Mederski, the editor-in-chief of Motorcycle Classics magazine. We're talking about winterizing our vehicles, and part of our vehicles are batteries. Mark, what should we be doing with batteries?
I'm not a scientist or an electrical engineer, but what I know about batteries from mainly you learn about things when they fail. Why did that happen? For the most part, the best practice on a battery is to keep it at full charge. And if you're storing a vehicle that's got a lead acid battery or a lithium ion battery, you're not running, the battery's not getting a charge from the alternator or generator on that machine. It's just static. It's just sitting there. The way that battery chemistry works, the battery will slowly lose charge. So when you call for it, it may be from, instead of being at 12 or 13 volts, it may be down to 6, and it won't run the starter. Buy yourself at least one battery maintenance machine. It's a plug in the wall. They're $25 to $100. You can buy some that have multiple leads on them. They'll have a plug. If you put a pigtail on, your vehicle. You can plug in quickly, or you can use the alligator clips on the end. Make sure that every 3-4 weeks you're out there charging that battery. It'll probably take 6 hours to overnight to do that. The most sophisticated chargers they'll tell you that you don't have to come back and turn it on and turn it off. I like to unplug it and walk away with it hanging on the wall ready for next time. We do hear those occasional horror stories of certain types of batteries or even battery maintenance devices flaming out. And that's the last thing you want to happen in your garage with all your favorite machines. 1 or 2 battery maintenance devices and use them every 3 weeks or so if the machine's sitting.
We are talking about winterizing your vehicles. And Mark, you worked in museums, which have the same goal, the conservation of parts. How can we preserve old rubber parts on machines that we know we cannot find replacements for?
Kenny, I have to say that I'm not optimistic about urethane and rubber parts. The first thing would be to keep them clean and keep them separated from any other kind of chemistry. In other words, you don't want grease or oil dripping onto or creeping into any synthetic parts like that. So clean them, dry them up, and protect them from any neighboring material. I believe that there's a wide, and this is modern polymer chemistry, but I think there's a wide range of chemistry that's used these days, and there's a wide range of relative durability. I think most of us have come across something that I loosely refer to as made from urethane that just crumbles. It's 10 or 20 years old, and it used to be black. It turns yellow or gray and just crumbles. It's similar to the metal. Magnesium, in my opinion, there are built-in elements in your average magnesium casting that will cause it to self-destruct.
And Mark, what do you do if you see powder coating peeling?
Yeah, powder coat. Sometimes when it's not applied with best practice, if the surface isn't prepped right, powder coat peels. And what you've got then is this little cavity between the plastic, which is what powder coat is essentially, and the metal that it's put over, which is usually steel. So that'll hold moisture worse in climates where they salt the roads. It'll hold corrosive salt. And if you want to see the worst of powder coat, look at a trailer hitch on a pickup or an automobile that's been added. And after a few years, they don't live in the friendliest environment down low on the vehicle there. They'll start peeling. I would go at it with a scraper kind of casually. You don't have to do it very carefully or anything. And knock off the loose stuff. Or maybe the next time you're at the car wash, put the 1,000 PSI wand on there and knock off some of the powder coat. And then grab a pint or a quart of a good black enamel. If you can find something that is referred to as a rust preventive enamel, just brush it on. I wouldn't even buy a spray can, because if you brush it on, you can really get on a heavy coat of that finish, and that'll creep into the cavities between the powder coat that's beginning to loosen up and cover up the rusty areas as well. So it's a stopgap. It'll look a little better and it'll slow the progress of the rust.
Thank you so much, Mark, for talking about winterizing our vehicles. Do you have any last words for our listeners?
Sure. A vehicle and machine person. I love steam engines, stationary engines, motorcycles, cars, all the above. When it comes to the best of these, the most interesting ones that we seem to collect and publish magazines about and such, I think we always need to keep in mind that we are stewards of these. It's a temporary ownership thing, and they're going to go on to another owner sometime in the future. So do your best to take care of it, preserve that history, knowing that while we might live 70, 80, 90, 100 years, that machine could live hundreds of years and help somebody down the road 10 generations understand what we really loved when we were on Earth.
Thank you so much, Mark, for the conversation today. I thoroughly appreciate it.
You bet, Kenny. Good to talk.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. To listen to more podcasts and get connected on our social media, visit www.motherearthnews.com/podcast. You can also email us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any questions or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Kenny Coogan, Alyssa Warner, and myself, Josh Wilder. Music for this episode is the song Hustle by Kevin MacLeod. The Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications.
Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.